I've had 4 drafts since the NFL draft, and we've spent God knows how many hours on these rankings. So I'm going to be happy to share with you our 2024 running back rankings as of May 2nd. Okay, we're going to go tier 1 here. We're actually going to have a couple different players in this tier. Christian McCaffrey obviously leading it off. Now, if you're an underdog drafts right now, you're going to see that CMC goes consistently at pick 1, pick 2, or pick 3. Now, I think with CMC, he fully deserves the top running back slot. Whether you're taking him over the top wide receivers is going to depend on how you prefer building your team through the middle rounds. I like a lot of the running back values in the middle rounds this year that we'll talk about later on in this video. So typically I'm preferring to go with like CeeDee Lamb over Christian McCaffrey in these underdog drafts. But nonetheless, if you're looking at CMC versus other RBs here, it's the running back that last year averaged, 24.7 points per game. Almost 25 points per game. 91 rushing yards per game, 35 receiving yards per game. He is a lock to score a touchdown every single week. Plus, obviously, this is someone that is the best receiving back in the NFL. So it's hard not to have him at RB1. Now, the reason we are not going to have him in his own tier is just simply due to the age. He was 27 this past year. He's going to turn 28 for this next season. If you're looking at the RotoViz screener to try to come up with historical comps, the similar age 27 seasons that we've had in the past, Brian Westbrook, 2006, Jamal Charles, 2013, Tiki Barber, 2002. If you look at the expected range of outcomes from these guys, they go from 27 to 28. Brian Westbrook actually got a little bit better, but Jamal Charles significantly worse. Fell from 25 points per game down to 17. Tiki Barber from 21 points per game down to 16. Edgar and James from 21 points per game down to 13. Eddie George, 21 points per game down to 11. Lamont Jordan, 21 points per game down to 8. Now, am I expecting CMC to fall down to 8 points per game? No, but it just does go to show that running backs will probably get worse when they're 28 years old, right? It's not like we're expecting CMC to get better. So I do think we have to put a slight discount on him, which is why I'm saying I just don't think he's the locked and loaded at 101. I do think he's in the tier with these other backs, but I still think he's the running back one clearly because he's a stud. Now, going over to RB2, I'm going to have Bijan Robinson, Hookamorans. The issue that you have with Bijan, he did not have a good rookie season. Obviously, if you took him mid-round 1 last year, he disappointed you. You probably did not perform well in fantasy, but going into year 2 should be a much better situation. You don't have Arthur Smith. I think the Cordell Patterson volume just goes straight to Bijan. Plus Cousins is obviously going to elevate this offense overall in comparison to freaking Desmond Ridder this past year. So yeah, Bijan, 3-down back, going to be 22 years old this next season. Capable receiver, much better offense, hopefully a better coaching staff. If you look at what he did at 21 years old and comp it to players historically, you had Lev Bell 2013, Jonathan Taylor 2020, Joe Mixon 2017, DeAndre Swift 2020, Maurice Jones-Drew 2006, Clyde Edwards-Helaire 2020, Javonte 2021, Kerryon Johnson 2018, and Jahmyr Gibbs, who we'll talk about in just one second. But the majority of these running backs got better in year 2, which is naturally what you'd expect from a 21-year-old RB. Now, going over to Breece Hall, Breece is going to be 23 years old this next season. So obviously still rising, still stepping into his prime. And Breece Hall is in a situation where you should have much better quarterback play now. Aaron Rodgers coming in, upgrading over Zach Wilson. It's not like this is only going to help Garrett Wilson. It's not like this is only going to help Malachi Corley, only going to help Mike Williams. It should help Breece Hall as well. Hall, phenomenal last season. If you look at the receiving usage, the man averaged 36 receiving yards per game. And obviously an offense that was just an abomination. It was embarrassing across the board. This is an RB that's going to be 2 years removed from a torn ACL, so he's going to be fully healthy. He gets a quarterback upgrade. He was already phenomenal last year. He was an elite level prospect coming out of school. Checks every single box. A lot of people have him as this year's league winner. It's understandable. If you look at his comps from last season at 22, he comps to like Steven Jackson, LT, Maurice Jones-Drew, Reggie Bush. You have some grossish stuff in here as well. You have Reggie Bush, Miles Sanders, Giovanni Bernard, DeAndre Swift, James Robinson, Trent Richardson, and Saquon Barkley. But keep in mind, Breece Hall was in a horrendous offense while at the same time coming off a significant injury. So I think this next year, you'd naturally assume that he improves at a greater clip than what the running backs in the past who comp to him actually did. And then the last running back in this year, I'm going to be planting my flag. I've seen, I believe, in 2 of the 3 underdog drafts that we've done on live stream so far, Jahmyr Gibbs fall to round 2. I have seen people taking Marvin Harrison Jr. over Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Gibbs is an elite level RB. Gibbs is a running back that went at the very top of round 1 of the NFL draft. He was sold to be the next Alvin Kamara. We all knew of his receiving capabilities. The only question is, can he get involved in the red zone? When they get inside the 5-yard line, are they going to be going with David Montgomery or are they going to be going with Jahmyr Gibbs? And this past year, the beginning of the season, that was the David Montgomery role. David Montgomery was their red zone back. David Montgomery was taking the majority of the usage and the majority of the high value touches at the goal line. But at the end of the season, Jahmyr Gibbs took that. Jahmyr Gibbs went, okay, no, I'm going to be the back that is seeing both the usage in the red zone, while at the same time, I'm going to be the running back that is getting everything as a receiver. So he is turning into exactly what he was sold to be. Everybody that loved Gibbs coming out of school last year sold him to be the next Alvin Kamara. And with Kamara, with prime Kamara, with prime Aaron Jones, these were running backs that didn't see every single touch out of their backfield, but they saw every high value touch. They saw all the targets. They saw all the red zone work. The Detroit Lions have an elite offensive line. The Detroit Lions look to be a very good offense. Jahmyr Gibbs at 21 years old last season comps to Bell, Taylor, Jacobs, Lynch, Maurice Jones-Drew, Todd Gurley. So I will go through and I'll be drafting Jahmyr Gibbs aggressively this next season if he is a round 2 pick. Obviously we are going to have Breece Hall over him, but I'm seeing a ton of people come out here and ring the bell for Breece Hall, claiming how he is the elite league winner, which he very well may be. Obviously he's very good. I think Gibbs at least deserves to be in this conversation as well. Now we're going to drop down a tier. This is going to be the tier of guys that you're considering in round 2 of underdog drafts. Right now, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, these are running backs that are going alongside the wide receivers, Harrison, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Devontae Adams. And I find myself drafting a lot of these running backs. I think I'm going to be taking Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to be taking Saquon Barkley over wide receivers like Drake London this year, even in underdog where wide receivers are pushed up. And looking at Taylor this past year, the comps, very hard to drive. He was injured. You had Gardner Minshew, quarterback. It's almost impossible to take too much away from last season. We know a few years back, Jonathan Taylor was a pure league winner. We know Jonathan Taylor was one of the best college running backs of all time. I don't want to go that far, but Jonathan Taylor, phenomenal college back, phenomenal prospect, phenomenal athlete. He's been a league winner in fantasy before. Weird season last year. I kind of want to take it, throw it out the window. If you're looking at the situation this next year, Anthony Richardson should come in, boost the overall efficiency of this rushing offense. It's going to be hard for linebackers to crash on Taylor when Anthony Richardson could take it himself and run around the edge. But there's a good with that. There's bad with that. Obviously, Anthony Richardson can take rushing touchdowns and probably has a lower check down rate overall. It's going to be the same thing with Saquon Barkley, though. If you're looking at Barkley, 26 years old this past year. The historical comps, not great. You have like Deuce McAllister, Carlos Hyde, Chris Johnson, Reggie Bush, Ezekiel Elliott. Now, of course, those are big-time names, but I don't want to just focus on the names. Let's focus on what those guys did at 27 years old, right? Because Barkley's going to be 27 this next season. McAllister, 16 points per game. Carlos Hyde, 14.5. Chris Johnson, 13.5. Reggie Bush, 13.5. Ezekiel Elliott, 13.5. So yeah, if you're looking at Barkley, the historical comps kind of say that he is in line maybe to be in RB2, but that doesn't take into the context that he is going from the Giants offense to the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think this should be a spot where we expect significantly more trips to the red zone, extended drives. It should be a much better team overall. Now, with all that being said, Jalen Hurts will steal rushing touchdowns at the goal line. Jalen Hurts will probably have a lower check down rate overall. So it's very similar like Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley. Both running backs disappointed last season. I think both running backs are way more talented than what their last seasons indicate. They're both going to be playing alongside rushing quarterbacks. I'm probably just going to go with Jonathan Taylor because he's the younger running back. And if you look at the historical comps, I kind of want to be betting on running backs that are going into their age 25 season rather than age 27 season. Now, looking at Kyren Williams here, I don't want to say got roasted. I don't even know what you want to say, but people were annoyed with us for just continuously talking about Kyren Williams, Puka. Those are the two names I'm going to be bringing up all year, and just get used to it because there are two big reasons we have to bring up these names. One, Kyren and Puka were the best examples of a league-winning fantasy option that you could ever see, right? I mean, both guys came from literally nowhere. They were off the waiver wire in your redraft leagues. They were 18th round underdog draft picks, and they won leagues. They were top 5 at their individual positions. And it's going to be important for me to talk about these guys often because I missed on both of them. I missed big time on both of these guys as well. So if you're looking at Kyren Williams, we have to go through, paint the entire picture. This is a running back that last year at 23 years old was a league winner, averaged 21 points per game, 95 rushing yards per game, 17 receiving yards per game. And he did so with a CMC level work share. I mean, if you're looking at the snaps that this man was playing, Kyren Williams was out there playing damn near 100% of the snaps. 100% of the snaps for this Rams offense. It obviously was a little bit closer to 90%, but the only running backs that you're ever seeing a workload like this in fantasy now are last year, Christian McCaffrey and Kyren Williams. Now, Kyren is smaller than the majority of those bell cow backs that we've seen in the past. And at the same time, now you see the Rams go out there and they take Blake Corum, who I'm not a big fan of, but they take him round 3. They give him a decent amount of draft capital. So I expect that Kyren Williams is probably a running back that will fall back down to earth just a bit. I don't know if he's going to be exactly how dominant he was last season, but he has plenty of room to fall. I mean, this is someone that could go from averaging 21 points per game down to 18 points per game and still obviously be an elite level option in fantasy. Now, if you think you'll be able to find this year's Kyren Williams, if you think you can do that, I'll tell you right now, you can probably win millions of dollars on Underdog. Yeah, Underdog just dropped, I believe, the Little Schnauzer, it's called. They just dropped the Little Eliminator. So many freaking Underdog tournaments there are right now. If you want to get into a fantasy football draft, now is the best time. I'm going to be streaming every single night. They're best ball drafts and no time commitment at all during the season. And yeah, if you use code FLOCK on Underdog, they're going to match first deposit, dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get access to flockfantasy.com where you can find all our best ball rankings to use on those Underdog drafts. And at the same time, they're going to hook you up with a special NBA pick'em depending on the night that you sign up. I think if you sign up tonight, it's going to be like Luka Doncic, more than less than half a total point. But if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get that special pick'em regardless of whatever day. It's just going to depend on that NBA game that night. But let's go over and let's look at what we have with our next guy, Travis Etienne. Etienne is a running back that I'm going to be significantly ahead of consensus on if you are looking at us versus current drafters on Underdog. Right now, Etienne on Underdog is a 4th round draft pick. I mean, as you can tell by these rankings, I have him over Devon Achane, who is a 2nd round selection. This is a 24-year-old running back that last season went out. He averaged about 16.5 points per game, which is very good. Obviously, I mean, the second half of the year wasn't great. The entire Jags offense imploded, and that's the main concern that you're going to have here. I mean, I am one to believe that Trevor Lawrence is a good NFL quarterback, that Trevor Lawrence was injured in the second part of last season, and that is what tanked the Jags offense. And I think the Jags will be an above average offense this next season. I think Etienne is an above average 3-down back that's still on his rookie contract and only going to be 25 years old this next year. He's capable as a rusher. He's capable as a receiver, and I'm expecting an offensive bounce back and maybe the Jags to push the pace of play a bit now that they're bringing in Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm excited. If you look at the historical comps for Travis Etienne, DeMarco Murray, Marion Barber, Devonta Freeman, Lamar Miller, Ramondre Stevenson, David Montgomery. These are all guys that had similar age 24 seasons. And the median projection should be about like 15 points per game for Etienne, which obviously isn't great, but that's why we're going to have him as a low-end RB1. Achane will be our next guy. I mean, we've talked about this a couple times now, but if you are looking at Devon Achane, this is a running back that you can make a very bullish case for, and that he was the most dynamic and the most explosive running back in the entire NFL last season. And honestly, if you are looking at historical data, if you are looking at his yards per carry, he was one of the most dynamic and explosive running backs we've ever seen in the NFL. Now, the reason we were saying to sell him previously is if you are looking at Achane and looking at that type of efficiency, what we see 9 times out of 10 is that efficiency will take a step backwards. He is not going to continue to dominate, continue to be at the top of the NFL in yards per carry. in that efficiency is extremely volatile year to year. And what you need to be chasing and what you need to see is you need to see volume, volume, volume. And it may be difficult for Etienne to get that volume just because he is a very small RB. So, yeah, positives, extremely explosive, very small, not the best pass catcher. Because if you are going to see a running back at this size consistently be an RB1, what we've needed to see in the past, which there have only been like 2 guys, is you've needed to see them come out and essentially have 7-8 targets per game. Achane didn't see that last year. I don't necessarily know if he can see that this season. He only averaged 19 points per game. I think the efficiency falls. The volume probably takes a small step up. They bring in Jalen Wright. You still have Raheem Mostert. So he's a committee RB where I think the efficiency is going to fall off. So, I mean, I'm going to be lower than consensus on Achane, I think. Even though in best ball, obviously, is exciting based on what we saw last season. Josh Jacobs will be our next guy. Jacobs won us $150,000 in underdog drafts 2 years ago, so we always got to flex on that. But nonetheless, 25-year-old running back the last year. I mean, Compton, O'Shawn Moreno, Pierre Thomas, Kareem Hunt, Ronnie Brown, Lamar Miller, Todd Gurley in their age 25 seasons. If you're looking at Jacobs, he's going over to what should be a better offense. He's going over to a Green Bay Packers team that has Jordan Love. And the only hesitation that I maybe have here is they re-sign A.J. Dillon. They draft Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. So while Jacobs in Las Vegas was a prototypical 3-down workhorse, I don't necessarily know if that's going to be guaranteed to be the case this next season. Now, I want to remind everybody, Jacobs was only 20 years old coming out of Alabama in the 2019 draft class. So he's only going to be 26 years old this next season. So it is nice to see that he has not hit the first age cliff that we typically expect at 27. He's still, historically speaking, should be in the prime of his career. Now, we are going to get into a very large tier. I don't know if we want to rapid fire a few of these guys. Let's do it. I'm actually going to have to move Derrick Henry up one spot in these rankings, but we're going to rapid fire James Cook, Rachaad White back to back. Both backs, very similar, 24-year-old RBs that, to be honest with you, I don't necessarily think are phenomenal talents. But it doesn't matter what we think of their talent profiles when they are locked and loaded into volume. Yes, the Bills bring in a running back on day 3, but if you look at the depth chart that they had, they were like relying on Darrington Evans to be their RB2 before the NFL draft. So, I mean, it's not really like you're sitting here going, oh, okay, yeah, they bring in a running back on day 3 to compete with James Cook. No, they just bring in a running back on day 3 to fill out the depth chart. You almost say the same thing about Tampa. It looks like James Cook, Rachaad White are both running backs that are penciled in to be starters next year. They're both still should be in the prime of their career. James Cook, 14.5 points per game last season. Rachaad White, 16.5 points per game last season. I think James Cook's going to be in a little bit of a better offense. I think you make a strong argument for either back, though. And now we will go with Derrick Henry at 13. With Henry, this is an older back that last year obviously wasn't great. I mean, if you're looking at Henry, I don't want to say it wasn't great. People get really upset when you say that, but didn't help you win fantasy leagues. He averaged 14 points per game. He averaged 63 rushing yards per game at the bottom of his NFL career. Looks like he's on the decline on paper, but you have to keep in mind the context of what happened last season in Tennessee. The Tennessee Titans had arguably one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. The Tennessee Titans went from Ryan Tannehill to Will Levis, and now Derrick Henry is getting to go from one of the worst offenses in the league to presumably one of the best in Baltimore. This is a Baltimore Ravens offense that, I mean, elevated Gus Edwards to be someone that was viable last season. So your argument may be, Mason, I'm pretty sure if Gus Edwards can get the job done, Derrick Henry is going to be able to as well. And fair argument to make. Typically, if I'm looking at these backs, say Henry had a worse season than Rachaad White. He had a worse season than James Cook last year. Derrick Henry in his 30s now. I typically just want to default to saying, okay, give me the running back that was better and is significantly younger. But you can make a strong argument that Derrick Henry would have been better than those other guys last season if he wasn't in such a bad situation, and now a situation is going to allow him to thrive. So that is why you're going to see Derrick Henry going in round 3 of these drafts. But you will probably see me waiting instead to draft a running back in round 4 where we can get Travis Etienne. So, yeah, I want to let you know Derrick Henry is going to be going a lot higher in these drafts than where we have him ranked currently. And I'm sure you probably see that with people screaming at me in the comment section. Now, our next guy, the next two guys, very similar. We're going to go Kenneth Walker and Isaiah Pacheco, both young, productive running backs, and both running backs that don't see any added competition to their backfields this year. If you're looking at Pacheco, you literally have nobody in KC playing alongside him now. I mean, you still have Zach Charbonnet if you are looking at Seattle. And the more that we think about this, the more that we probably have to move Pacheco up these rankings. I mean, Pacheco's just in such a good spot, especially considering the fact that, I mean, Kenneth Walker, 13.5 points per game last season. We know Zach Charbonnet is going to be the running back that has receiving usage. And what was very impressive about Pacheco is he actually started to get targeted at the second half of last year. Pacheco averaged 17.5 receiving yards per game, 15.5 fantasy points per game in one of the best offenses in the league. So, yeah, we're going to move Pacheco up to 14, and we're going to have Walker down to 15. Walker, I do believe in a vacuum, is the more talented back, but honestly, it doesn't matter what I think there. And then our last running back in this tier is going to be Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, another one of these running backs drafted in 2017, but he was younger than everybody else in the class. So, I mean, he's only 27. He was 27 last year. He's going to be 28 years old this next season. Last season, I want to say it was a good situation in Cincinnati if it wasn't for the injury that you had with Burrow. Obviously, the entire Cincinnati season is needed to be taken with that context that Burrow was injured. So, Mixon's 15 points per game. It was in a horrendous offense. And now you're going to Houston. Houston is an offense that made Devin Singletary look good at times. It's never a good sign for a team to get rid of a veteran RB for pretty much nothing and just want to get their contract off the books. But Mixon should be in a better offense than he was last season. Isn't super old. Is a capable receiving back, had 23 receiving yards per game last season. A better receiving back's Alvin Kamara. Now, the difference between Mixon and Kamara and why Kamara is going to be a tier down is, even though Kamara was better last year, Kamara is a year older than Mixon, even though they're in the same class. And more importantly, Kamara is in a worse offense. He's going to be in New Orleans, and New Orleans looked at what they had last year and went, let's run it back. Yeah, let's sign up for this again for whatever reason. So you're looking at a running back that, I mean, typically I'd expect a significant fall off at 28 years old, but when the majority of his value is derived as a receiver, I think you can maybe hold off a little bit more hope for Kamara. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to have Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson, 25-year-old back last season. Super wide range of outcomes here. I mean, if you're looking at the comps, you have comps like Tevin Coleman, Devin Singletary, Kevin Jones, all at 25 years old, the following year averaging single-digit fantasy points. And then you have a couple guys up there like James Conner in 2020 averaging 16 points per game. So Ramondre, tough to know what we're going to have. This coaching staff that doesn't really have much allegiance to him. Obviously, they don't bring in anybody significant. But maybe they bring in Gibson. Maybe that matters. Stevenson really bad last year. I mean, Stevenson's 12 points per game really made no difference at all to your fantasy team. And you have a question mark at quarterback with Drake Love. I think Love can be good in the long term, but we have no idea what he is this season. Aaron Jones, I am just a little bit nervous about because it's going to be another running back that's pushing 30. Another running back that his team decided to get rid of him, right? I mean, the Green Bay Packers could have kept Jones. Instead, they decided, okay, yeah, let's re-sign Dillon. Let's draft Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. And let's go sign Josh Jacobs. So when we see the team in the building that has more information about Aaron Jones than I could ever dream of having, say, yeah, we're good without him. A fan favorite. Let him go to a division rival. One, that's concerning. Obviously, it doesn't mean that the man's horrible. It's just something that we need to take into context. And then also with Jones, pushing 30. If you look at the historical comps, you have the high-end options like Fred Jackson. Going into his age 30 season, he averaged 21 points per game with a similar age 29 season as Aaron Jones. Thomas Jones was up at 17.5. Mark Ingram up at 16.5. But you also had some guys flame out. Like, Ryan Matthews and Montgomery were done in the NFL after their age 29 season. That looked like Jones. But now let's go over to Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard, I didn't really draft at all, but I don't know. You get the contract in Tennessee. You're a somewhat capable receiving back. So if you're pretty much locked and loaded into a workload and you're a capable receiver, we have to give you some kind of floor, but this is a very bad offense. I don't think Tony Pollard's that good. So you know what? No, we got to move Pollard even lower than this. Because if you look at the historical comps too, Tony Pollard, his age 26 season, looked similar to Lamar Miller, Andre Brown, Sean Green, Michael Pittman, Kareem Hunt. And none of these guys averaged more than 13 points per game their following year. So we're moving Pollard to the bottom of this year. We're going to go David Montgomery next. My concern with Montgomery, obviously, if you look at the season-long numbers, Montgomery looked good. But I'm worried if Jahmyr Gibbs takes the receiving workload. I'm sorry, the red zone workload. Because we already know Gibbs has the receiving load on lock. So if all of a sudden you are getting Jahmyr Gibbs as the red zone back, David Montgomery is still going to have a role from week to week perspective. But what is that role? That role is going to be David Montgomery is seeing the carries in between the 20-yard lines. So he can come away with 11 carries per game. And hell, he can be a great running back. He can average 5 yards per carry. And oh, great, you had 11 carries for 55 rushing yards, 1 reception for 8 receiving yards. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your 7 fantasy points. So Montgomery can still be a useful running back to the Detroit Lions. He can still have a role from a week-to-week perspective. And if he's not getting the high value touches, which I'm expecting Jahmyr Gibbs to get those this season, it may not mean that David Montgomery's startable outside of Jahmyr Gibbs' injury. Now, if Gibbs goes down based off this offense, based off Montgomery's talent, and based off him getting that red zone role, I think David Montgomery would be an RB1. So, I think he's probably the most premium handcuffed running back in fantasy that you can start if you're desperate in a bye week. And then moving over to what we have with our last tier, Najee Harris is someone that we have to move lower than this. Running the comps with Najee, we'll talk about him. We're going to move him down, though. This was really concerning to see. Najee Harris, a 25-year-old running back that last year averaged 10.5 fantasy points per game, 57.5 rushing yards per game, no receiving role, and 9 receiving yards per game. If you look at the historical comps, the 25-year-old running backs that look similar, Peyton Hillis, LeGarrette Blount, Isaiah Crowell, Maurice Smith, Terrence West, Ben Tate, Deonta Foreman, Rashad Penny, Cedric Benson. The best running back out of this group that had a similar age 25 season to Najee Harris the following year was 10.5 fantasy points per game. Now, you can make the argument for Najee. Well, Mason, he was stuck in a horrendous situation. Mason, if we get this situation cleaned up and all of a sudden, Najee Harris is playing with an above average quarterback, whether that's Russell Wilson, whether that's Justin Fields, I think Russ is going to be the guy who starts, right? I don't know. You can make an argument for why Najee failed and why he'll be better this next season. But the historical comps are extremely concerning at this point. If you all remember what we were looking at with the first 2 years of his NFL career, he was on the same trajectory as only other 2 running backs, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and James Robinson. So, it's just continued to play out in year 3. Our next guy, DeAndre Swift, has really bad comps. Swift, 24-year-old running back last season that played in a good offense in Philly. The only saving grace that I think you get is DeAndre Swift gets paid. So since DeAndre Swift gets the bag, and I think Chicago should be a very good offense this next season. Right now, an Underdog drafts 3 Chicago Bears wide receivers getting drafted in the first 3 rounds. I think you need to give the benefit of the doubt to Swift, even though he's failed the past 2 years. But I mean, it's hard to make the argument that the Bears are going to be a better offense than what Philly was. Javante's going to be our next guy. I mean, with Javante, I understand that everybody wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. I know where you're coming from. It's a running back that averaged 10.5 points per game last season. Well, yeah, the situation was bad. I don't know if we can come out here and say, okay, Bo Nix is locked and loaded to be a stud QB. I have no idea what Bo Nix is going to be. So his range of outcomes, I mean, you have Travis Henry. Keep in mind, Javante's still young. He's only going to be 24 this next year. Breaking out, averaging 19 points per game as a 24-year-old back. You had Ahmad Bradshaw up at 15.5 points per game. If you're a massive Bo Nix guy, I think you can make an argument for having him higher than this. And then our last guy will be James Conner. James Conner's going to be 28. James Conner now has Trey Benson in town. I think Benson long-term is the starting running back here. Obviously, James Conner maybe in the short term is the starting back. And I think you make a strong argument to move up Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson up to this range instead of having James Conner there. But let me know if y'all have any issues with these rankings. I'm sure y'all will. And if you're going to go down to the comment section and scream at me saying, oh my gosh, Mason, I can't believe you didn't rank running back X inside the top 25. Let me know who you're moving out of the top 25 to get that guy in. But thank you again. Really appreciate you. I'm going to be live streaming Underdog drafts every single night if you want to hop in and draft against me. And yeah, if you are not already on Underdog for whatever reason, you can find that link in the description in the comment section. Code FLOCK, get you hooked up with a 100% deposit match plus our Dynasty and best ball rankings through flockfantasy.com. And you'll get a special NBA pick'em, whether that's like Luka Doncic, more than less than half a total point, or just whatever NBA player you sign up for that day with if you use code FLOCK. But thank you again. Really do appreciate you. Really hope we get to draft with you in the live stream tonight.